From letting the limbs of his victims wash up on shore for the police to find, from dumping his sister's body in the same ocean he used for serial killers. These are the dumbest moments in Dexter Morgan's entire run, when the perfect killer acted like he's never done this before. Starting with one nobody can forget, keeping Nurse Mary's earrings. Dexter's first kill nearly became his last because of one impulsive decision. After successfully murdering Nurse Mary, who was poisoning patients, including his father Harry, Dexter got caught up in the euphoria of the moment and pocketed her distinctive earrings as a trophy. Big mistake. Deborah discovered them in his apartment and, thinking they belonged to a secret girlfriend, gave them to her friend Sophia as a gift. With that, the murder evidence was in a stranger's hands. Dexter had to awkwardly seduce Sophia and fake an entire relationship just to retrieve the earrings before they could be traced back to the crime. But Dexter didn't just leave behind physical evidence. Sometimes it was the words that gave him away. For example, quoting a victim to Dokes. Sometimes one sentence can destroy your entire life, and Dexter learned this lesson the hard way at a police station. While talking with Dokes during a routine conversation, Dexter casually quoted something he heard from one of his victims. Never jump the fence if you're not willing to face what's on the other side. What seemed like an innocent piece of advice was actually a massive red flag to someone with Dokes' experience. The seasoned detective immediately recognized that this wasn't the kind of thing that people normally said, and his suspicion radar went into overdrive. He read the phrase in one of the serial killer's journals, "one Dexter killed." Dokes immediately challenged Dexter about where he heard that phrase. When Dexter claimed a friend had said it during a moment of stress, Dokes didn't buy it for a second, responding with a blunt bullshit. The single moment of carelessness put Dexter squarely on the radar of the most dangerous cop in Miami Metro. By quoting something he heard during one of his kills, Dexter had unknowingly revealed that he had connection to situations and people that a blood spatter analyst shouldn't know. But that wasn't the worst thing to resurface. Wait until you hear what washed up next. Literally. Dexter's second kill told him that even alligators can't be trusted to clean up properly. After murdering loan shark Terry Furrer, Dexter confidently dumped the dismembered body into the Everglades, assuming that local wildlife would dispose of everything. Well, he was wrong. Furrer's arm, along with his golden serpent ring, survived the feeding frenzy and washed up where someone could find it. Suddenly, Miami Metro had an active homicide case on their hands, and ironically, Dexter found himself assigned to investigate his own murder. The situation got even more absurd when he had to return to the crime scene with his forensics badge and literally feed the remaining evidence to a nearby alligator while pretending to examine the area professionally. Talk about cleaning up your own mess. But Dexter's evidence problems were just getting started. Dexter's protective instincts got the better of him when Rita's abusive ex-husband, Paul, showed up drunk and threatening. Instead of walking away or calling the police like a normal person, Dexter grabbed a frying pan and knocked Paul unconscious right there in Rita's kitchen. The attack itself wasn't the actual problem here, it's what happened next. In his rush to get Paul out of the house before Rita and the social worker returned, Dexter completely forgot that Paul had lost a shoe during the struggle. When Paul later told Rita about his missing footwear, she searched the house and found it. Suddenly, Rita had physical evidence that someone had been violent with Paul in her home, and Dexter had no good explanation for how a shoe ended up there. Dexter knocking out an ex with cookware might sound noble. Wait until we get to the stuff that actually got people killed. Hit subscribe now if you're strapped in. But this guy is just not that good at relationships overall, which leads me to his next dumb decision, letting Brian get too close to Deborah. Dexter's failure to recognize the danger right under his nose nearly costed him his sister's life when he allowed the ice truck killer to infiltrate his family. Despite his supposed expertise at reading people and detecting killers, Dexter was completely blind to the threat when Brian Moser began dating Deborah under the alias Rudy Cooper. All of the warning signs were there: Rudy's convenient appearance in Deborah's life, his medical knowledge, and his suspicious interest in Dexter's work. But Dexter was so focused on the ice truck killer that he failed to connect the dots about his sister's new boyfriend. He even welcomed Rudy into family gatherings, making small talk and sharing meals with the very killer who was taunting him through elaborate crime scenes. The oversight was particularly dangerous because Brian had direct access to Deborah's schedule, her vulnerabilities, and her trust. He could study her routines, learn her fears, and plan her kidnapping, all while appearing to be the loving boyfriend. When Brian finally revealed himself and captured Deborah, strapping her to his kill table, Dexter realized his terrible mistake. His inability to see the killer hiding in plain sight had handed his sister directly to a psychopath. The very person he had been hunting was right there, and Dexter never suspected a thing. He either didn't see his enemy or saw it and ignored it altogether. Which brings us to the tranquilizer gun incident. Dexter's encounter with Lil Chino Chino proves that you should never underestimate your target. Needing a tranquilizer gun for his kills, Dexter borrowed an M99 dart gun from the Miami Metro evidence locker under the pretense of having an alligator problem at home. The plan seemed foolproof until he met Little Chino, a mountain of muscle who proved stronger than Dexter anticipated. Not only did Little Chino break free from his restraints while supposedly tranquilized, but he and his crew escaped with Dexter's weapon. Now, there was a police-issued tranquilizer gun floating around Miami's criminal underworld with a direct paper trail leading back to Miami Metro's evidence room. If that gun ever turned up at another crime scene, investigators would immediately know it came from inside the department. Speaking of evidence trails, Dexter's next mistake involves something even more trackable than weapons: his phone. Dexter's complete disregard for operational security is proven by all the times he literally answered his phone while dismembering corpses. In the middle of cutting up Jaworski's body in the literal first episode, his cell phone rang, and instead of letting it go to voicemail, like any sensible serial killer would, Dexter usually took the call. He easily talked about normal life while standing over bloody body parts. The sheer audacity was staggering, but the real danger was technological. If anyone had ever bothered to cross-reference phone records with the timeline of the victim's disappearance, they would have found Dexter's phone, placing him at the scene during the window of the crime. But it's what came next that handed his girlfriend a map to his kill site. Technology betrayed Dexter in the worst way possible when he forgot to cover his digital tracks after the most important drive of his life. When Dexter captured Sergeant Dokes and needed to transport him to a remote cabin, he borrowed Rita's minivan for the job. The trip went perfectly. He successfully moved his biggest threat to an isolated location where he could decide what to do with him. But in an unbelievable oversight, Dexter forgot to clear the GPS navigation history from Rita's vehicle. Layla, already suspicious and obsessed with uncovering Dexter's secrets, accessed the GPS system and found the exact route to the cabin. She literally followed Dexter's digital breadcrumbs straight to where he was holding a police sergeant captive. One button press would have prevented the entire disaster, but Dexter's carelessness handed his psychotic girlfriend a roadmap to his darkest secret. But that brings us to the next dumb thing that no one will ever forgive him for, which was bringing Layla into his life. Dexter's decision to revive Layla West and his personal struggles created a cascade of disasters that endangered everyone he cared about. When Rita discovered Dexter's lies and demanded he get help, he fabricated a drug addiction story that forced him into Narcotics Anonymous meeting. There, he met Layla, a manipulative British woman who seemed to understand his dark passenger in ways Rita never could. What started as therapeutic guidance quickly became an obsessive relationship that Layla weaponized against Dexter's entire support system. She framed Angel Batista to eliminate competition for Dexter's attention, forcing him to choose between protecting his colleague and maintaining his cover story. But Layla's most unforgivable act was kidnapping Aster and Cody, locking them in her apartment before setting it ablaze in a twisted attempt to play hero and win Dexter's gratitude. She nearly murdered 2 innocent children just to manipulate his emotions. Dexter's romantic involvement with this unstable woman didn't just hurt Rita emotionally, it transformed Layla from a troubled addict into a dangerous killer. His influence corrupted her completely, turning someone who might have been saved into another predator who had to be eliminated. By bringing Layla into his world, Dexter proved he was willing to sacrifice everyone else's safety for his own psychological needs. His selfish decision to confide in the wrong person nearly cost his family their lives. He didn't see it coming, but that seems to be the theme in his life. Dexter's complete obliviousness to security cameras almost ended his career when he casually cleaned blood off his boat in full view of marina surveillance. After disposing of another victim, Dexter routinely washed down his boat at the dock, scrubbing away evidence like he's done dozens of times before. What he didn't realize was that the marina security camera was recording every moment of his cleanup routine. When FBI agent Frank Lundy began investigating the Bay Harbor butcher case, he requested footage from all local marinas to identify suspicious activity. Suddenly, Dexter faced the terrifying prospect of a federal agent watching video of him washing blood evidence off his boat. In a panic, he had to sneak back to the marina and delete the incriminating footage just hours before Lundy would have seen it. One lazy assumption about surveillance nearly put him on FBI's most wanted list. But footage wasn't his only problem. Sometimes it was his own mouth, like when he spilled everything to Miguel. When Miguel caught him at Freebo's kill site with the murder weapon, instead of running, Dexter chose to trust him completely. He opened up about his vigilante activities, explaining his code and methods, believing that he had finally found someone who could accept his true nature. Miguel did seem to embrace Dexter's mission, even wanting to participate in the kills, but Dexter had misread the situation entirely. Miguel wasn't interested in justice. He was using Dexter's teachings to eliminate his own personal enemies, including defense attorney Ellen Wolf. What Dexter thought was acceptance was actually manipulation, and his oversharing gave Miguel everything he needed to exploit their friendship for his own murderous agenda. But trusting Miguel wasn't even Dexter's first mistake that season. It all started when one impulsive moment of violence by killing killing Oscar Praau. Dexter's inability to mind his own business created the disaster that consumed all of Season 3 when he impulsively intervened in a drug deal gone wrong. While tracking his target Freebo, Dexter witnessed Oscar Praau attacking the dealer with a knife in a dark alley. Any smart person would have walked away and let the criminals sort out their own problems, but Dexter couldn't resist playing hero. When Oscar turned the knife on him, Dexter killed him in self-defense, driving the blade straight into Oscar's heart. In that split second, Dexter had unknowingly murdered the brother of the ambitious ADA, Miguel Praau. This single moment of unnecessary intervention created a connection to one of Miami's most powerful legal families and set in motion a chain of events that would nearly destroy Dexter's entire life. One impulsive decision to get involved in something that wasn't his business led to manipulation, betrayal, and almost complete exposure. Because then came Trinity, and a decision that left a child killer walking free. Dexter reached peak selfishness when he actively saved a child killer from justice just to preserve his own twisted fantasy. After Arthur Mitchell murdered a 4-year-old boy, police arrived and had Trinity cornered with nowhere to run. Justice was literally seconds away from being served for a man who had tortured and killed dozens of innocent people over 30 years. But Dexter couldn't let that happen, not because he cared about Trinity, but because he wanted to kill Arthur himself in the proper way with plastic wrap, ritual, and his perfect kill room setup. So Dexter intervened, helping Trinity escape from police custody and allowing a serial killer to remain free. He prioritized his own needs over protecting the public from a monster who had just murdered a child. The ritual was more important to Dexter than justice, and his selfish decision to save Trinity would soon cost him everything he held dear. And if saving him was bad, then wait until you see what Dexter casually told him. Dexter's inability to maintain a simple cover story cost him his wife's life when he carelessly revealed identifying details about his neighborhood to Trinity. While posing as Kyle Butler, Dexter was supposed to be a stranger learning from Arthur's family balancing skills, but he couldn't help dropping casual references to his actual life. He mentioned specific details about his area, local landmarks, and neighborhood characteristics that allowed Trinity to piece together where he really lived. Arthur was far more observant than Dexter gave him credit for, and he collected every small clue Dexter unknowingly provided. When Trinity finally realized that Kyle Butler was actually the person hunting him, he used those gathered details to track down Dexter's real address. Rita died in their bathtub because Dexter was too comfortable in his fake identity and couldn't resist sharing authentic details from his actual life. Casual conversation killed the woman he loved. But revealing his location wasn't even Dexter's worst decision involving Trinity. It was leaving Rita alone on Thanksgiving. Dexter chose the worst possible time to abandon his family when he ditched Rita on Thanksgiving to play house with a serial killer. Despite knowing that Trinity was escalating, becoming more unpredictable, and posing an active threat, Dexter decides spending the holiday with Arthur Mitchell's family was more important than being with his pregnant wife and children. Rita needed him at home, especially with her difficult pregnancy and the stress of managing the household, but Dexter was completely consumed by his fascination with how Trinity balanced family life with murder. So he lied to Rita, made excuses, and spent Thanksgiving dinner learning from a child killer instead of protecting his own family. While Dexter was sitting around Trinity's table, marveling at Arthur's domestic facade, Rita was alone and vulnerable. His obsession with understanding another killer's methods mattered more to him than his wife's safety, and that misplaced priority cost Rita her life. Dexter's judgment became so compromised that he murdered a completely innocent man based on nothing but circumstantial evidence. Convinced that the photographer, Jonathan Farrow, was killing his models, Dexter captured him and strapped him to the kill table despite having only suspicious behavior and opportunity as proof. Even as Farrow desperately maintained his innocence, begging for his life and insisting he would never hurt anyone, Dexter refused to listen. His need to kill had become so overwhelming that he ignored his own code's most fundamental rule: be certain the target is a killer. Dexter plunged the knife into Farrow's chest anyways, only later to discover the photographer was exactly what he claimed to be, an innocent man trying to help troubled women through his art. This was the first time that Dexter deliberately murdered someone he knew might be innocent, shattering the moral framework that had guided him for decades. At this point, Dexter wasn't just making mistakes, he was rewriting his own code on the fly, killing someone without proof, teaching a civilian how to kill. Let me know in the comments where you think he officially lost the plot. And breaking the code was just the beginning of Dexter's boundary violations, like teaching Lumen to kill, then letting her leave. Dexter's handling of Lumen Pierce was everything you don't do with a traumatized victim. After finding her as a broken survivor seeking revenge against her attackers, Dexter had the opportunity to help help her heal and find justice through proper channels. Instead, he decided to corrupt her completely by teaching her his killing methods, showing her how to use his tools, and involving her in his ritual murders. He turned an innocent victim into an accomplice, making her complicit in multiple deaths when she should have been getting therapy and support. Then, after creating the security nightmare by training someone else to kill, Dexter made an even worse decision. He just let her walk away. Lumen left knowing his real identity, his methods, his kill room location, his disposal techniques, and enough evidence to destroy him completely. She could have exposed him at any moment, but Dexter trusted that love would keep her quiet forever. He corrupted an innocent woman, then created a permanent liability who could end his life with one phone call. Unfortunately, Dexter's poor judgment with Travis would lead to an even bigger disaster. Dexter's fascination with psychological puzzles led him to make one of the most catastrophically stupid decisions when he chose to work with a dangerous serial killer instead of eliminating the threat. After discovering that Travis Marshall was the Doomsday Killer, staging gruesome biblical murder tableaus around Miami, Dexter had the perfect opportunity to capture and kill him. Case closed, threat eliminated. But then Dexter became intrigued by Travis's delusion about his mentor, Professor Geller, and decided that he needed to understand the psychological dynamics at play. Instead of following his usual protocol, Dexter asked Travis to help him kill the professor, thinking if he could save Travis, then he could save himself. Dexter genuinely believed that he could rehabilitate Travis and turn him into an ally. This misguided attempt at playing therapist allowed Travis to continue his apocalyptic murder spree, killing more innocent people while Dexter tried to fix him. Public safety meant nothing compared to Dexter's intellectual curiosity about another killer's fractured psyche, and his need to understand Travis's mental illness cost multiple lives that could have been saved with one simple kill. When it finally came time to clean up the Travis mess, Dexter decided fire was the answer. Dexter's panic-induced decision to commit arson created far more problems than it solved when he burned down an entire church to cover up one kill. After finally killing Travis Marshall in an abandoned church, Dexter heard Deborah approaching and made the catastrophically dumb decision to set the whole building on fire rather than simply slip out the back. He thought burning everything would destroy all evidence of his presence, but instead he created a massive crime scene that drew citywide attention. Fire investigators, federal agents, and media swarmed the location, turning what should have been a quiet disappearance into Miami's biggest story. Even worse, in his rush to start the fire, Dexter forgot he left behind a blood slide from Travis, the one piece of evidence that wouldn't burn. The slide was discovered in the debris, giving Maria LaGuerta the proof she needed to reopen the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. A simple exit strategy became an arson that nearly exposed him completely. But burning a church was nothing compared to the damage caused by the people he let live. Dexter's misguided compassion led him to spare a potential serial killer who likely had already murdered his own family members. After traveling all the way to Nebraska to eliminate Trinity's son Jonah, who showed disturbing signs of inheriting his father's homicidal tendencies, Dexter had a last-minute change of heart. Despite evidence suggesting Jonah had killed his mother and sister, Dexter convinced himself the young man was just traumatized and damaged rather than dangerous. He decided to spare Jonah's life, believing he could overcome his dark urges unlike his father. But subsequent questioning and investigation strongly indicated that Jonah had indeed murdered his family members, meaning Dexter had just released another serial killer onto the world. His emotional decision to show mercy overrode the logical evidence that Jonah was following in Trinity's footsteps. By letting sentiment cloud his judgment, Dexter potentially condemned future innocent victims to death at the hands of the next generation Mitchell killer. But sparing a maybe killer was one thing. Falling for a definite killer? That took things to another level. Dexter hit rock bottom when he literally chose to sleep with a serial killer instead of following his code. After confirming that Hannah McKay was a murderer who poisoned multiple victims, Dexter had her strapped to his kill table, ready for execution. The evidence was solid, she fit the code perfectly, and justice was moments away. But Hannah's seductive confidence and complete lack of fear intrigued him in a way no victim had ever before. Instead of plunging the knife into her chest, Dexter found himself attracted to her darkness and acceptance of what he was. So he slept with her right there on his kill table, the same surface where he murdered dozens of people. This was him completely abandoning everything Harry had taught him. For the first time in his killing career, romantic feelings overrode logic, duty, and public safety. Hannah should have died that night, but Dexter's hormones made him spare a dangerous killer who would go on to poison more victims. And if betraying the code for romance wasn't enough, he also dragged his sister down with him. Dexter reached peak selfishness when he forced his traumatized sister to murder an innocent woman rather than face the consequences of his own actions. After Maria LaGuerta discovered he was the Bay Harbor Butcher, Dexter found himself in a shipping container standoff with Deborah holding LaGuerta at gunpoint. He had multiple options. He could have disarmed Deborah, confessed everything to LaGuerta, or or taken responsibility and killed Rita himself. Instead, he chose the most cowardly path possible, standing back and letting his emotionally destroyed sister make the impossible choice between saving him or doing what's right. Deborah had already been psychologically shattered by learning Dexter's secret, and now he was forcing her to become a murderer to protect him. When Deborah pulled the trigger, killing an innocent police captain who was simply doing her job, Dexter destroyed the last pure person in his life. He turned his sister into a killer rather than face justice himself. But corrupting Deborah wasn't even Dexter's most disturbing relationship decision that season. Can't forget the fact that he chose to dump Deborah's body in the ocean. Dexter's complete emotional breakdown reached its horrifying climax when he treated his beloved sister's body just like another victim to be disposed of. After Deborah suffered a stroke and was left brain dead, Dexter made the agonizing decision to take her off life support. But instead of arranging a proper funeral or burial that would honor the person who loved him the most, Dexter carried her lifeless body out of the hospital in broad daylight like he was stealing medical equipment. He then took her to his boat, then dumped her in the same ocean where he had disposed of dozens of murder victims over the years. The woman who had been his moral compass, his protector, and his greatest love was treated with the same cold efficiency as every serial killer he had ever butchered. Deborah deserved a funeral, flowers, and people mourning her loss. Instead, she got the same watery grave as psychopaths and murderers. It was complete emotional shutdown disguised as practicality. But even after treating Deb like evidence, Dexter somehow managed to top that with what he did to his own son. Dexter committed the ultimate act of parental cruelty when he abandoned his 4-year-old son at an airport to protect his own selfish emotional needs. After planning their escape to Argentina together, Dexter had everything arranged: fake passports, new identities, and a fresh start with Hannah and Harrison as a family. But at the last possible moment, standing in the airport with his innocent child, Dexter decided he was too dangerous to be around and abruptly changed the entire plan. Instead of explaining anything to his son or finding a better solution, he simply walked away and left Harrison with Hannah, a woman the boy barely knew, and was also a serial killer herself and not the most stable. Then Dexter faked his own death, making his 4-year-old son believe his father had died in a hurricane. Harrison would grow up thinking that he was an orphan, carrying the trauma of losing both parents, when his father was actually alive and had simply chosen to abandon him. Dexter prioritized his own guilt and self-pity over his son's emotional well-being and need for a parent. With that, he didn't pay a lot of attention to his surroundings at the time, like when he broke into AJ Yates' house. Dexter's complete obliviousness to surveillance technology nearly got him arrested when he broke into AJ Yates' house without bothering to check for security cameras. Convinced Yates was the brain surgeon killer, Dexter decided to gather evidence by illegally entering his home and searching through his belongings. Any competent criminal would have scoped out the property first, but Dexter just picked the lock and waltzed inside, like he owned the place. What he completely failed to notice was Yates' obvious security camera system recording his every move as he rummaged through rooms, examined personal items, and basically committed felony breaking and entering on high-definition video. The video footage clearly shows his face, captured his illegal activities, and provided perfect evidence for prosecution. Dexter was lucky that Yates was already dead when the police discovered the security footage, because otherwise he would have been arrested on the spot for burglary. Years of successful killing had made him overconfident and sloppy about basic security measures. But Dexter's poor judgment didn't stop at dinner guests. It extended right into felony break-ins. Dexter's inability to control his impulses destroyed 10 years of successful hiding when he murdered Matt Caldwell over a seemingly minor hunting violation. After a decade of living peacefully as Jim Lindsay in Iron Lake, Dexter has built the perfect new life with a normal job, a police chief girlfriend, and zero suspicion from anyone. He has successfully suppressed his dark passenger and was living as a reformed man. Then, entitled Rich Kid Matt Caldwell shot a protected white deer on the nature preserve, and Dexter completely lost control. Instead of walking away from something that wasn't his business, Dexter confronted Matt about the illegal kill. When Matt showed no remorse and even mocked the situation, Dexter snapped. What should have been a verbal confrontation escalated when Dexter struck Matt with a rifle, killing him instantly. That single moment of violence shattered everything he'd worked for. He went from being a reformed lumberyard worker to having a dead body on his hands, forcing him back into killing mode after years of restraint. 10 years of careful identity building was destroyed because Dexter couldn't let some spoiled brat get away with killing a deer. One moment of uncontrolled anger over wildlife conservation brought his dark passenger roaring back to life and set in motion the events that would ultimately destroy his new life in Iron Lake. But the real screw-up came later, when he forgot that screws couldn't burn. Dexter's decade away from killing made him forget the most basic rule of body disposal when he left Matt Caldwell's titanium knee screws in the crematorium. After deciding to burn Matt's body at the local funeral home incinerator, Dexter thought that he was being clever by using professional equipment that would completely destroy all evidence. He assumed the intense heat would reduce everything to ash, just like it did with legitimate cremations. But Dexter had gotten rusty on his forensic knowledge. He completely forgot that titanium surgical implants don't melt at normal cremation temperatures. When the funeral director cleaned out the incinerator, he found the distinctive screws that had been implanted in Matt's knees during a previous surgery. Those screws could be traced back to Matt through medical records, proving definitely that his body had been burned there. 10 years of retirement had made Dexter sloppy about the technical details that made him once such an effective killer. This was a basic forensic oversight that the old Dexter never would have made, and after blowing his cover, Dexter committed a murder that stripped away every last excuse. Dexter revealed his true monster nature when he murdered the one person trying to help him escape a hopeless situation. Arrested by Angela and facing exposure as the Bay Harbor Butcher, Dexter found himself in a jail cell talking with Sergeant Logan, a genuinely good man who had always been kind to him. Logan wasn't there to interrogate him or threaten him. He was actually trying to be supportive, offering comfort during what he thought was a difficult time for someone he considered a friend. But when Logan got close enough, Dexter's survival instincts kicked in and he snapped the sergeant's neck without hesitation. This wasn't self-defense or code-justifying killing. This was murdering an innocent man who had shown him nothing but kindness. Logan had a family and was respected in the community, as well as trying to help Dexter in his moment of need. His brutal murder proved that all Dexter's talk about being a dark defender was baseless. He wasn't a hero who killed bad people. He was just a killer who would murder anyone who stood between him and freedom. And in the end, he didn't face justice. He passed the burden to his own son by asking Harrison to shoot him. Dexter committed the ultimate act of parental abuse when he manipulated his traumatized teenage son into becoming his executioner. After Harrison discovered the truth about Logan's murder and realized his father wasn't the vigilante hero he claimed to be, Dexter found himself facing the consequences of a lifetime of terrible decisions. But instead of taking responsibility or finding another solution, Dexter chose the most psychologically damaging path possible, convincing Harrison that killing his own father was the right thing to do. He manipulated his son's emotions, played on his trauma, and essentially groomed him to commit patricide by framing it as an act of love and justice. Harrison, already struggling with his own dark urges and the revelation about his father's true nature, was forced to pull the trigger on the man who gave him life. Dexter turned his final moment with his son into the ultimate trauma, ensuring that Harrison would carry the psychological burden of patricide for the rest of his life. It was the most selfish possible ending to their relationship, and that's how America's favorite serial killer finally got what he deserved, but only after destroying everyone who ever loved him. Some of these choices were reckless, some were just plain stupid, but every single one chipped away at the myth of Dexter's perfect control. If you're into these kind of breakdowns, hit subscribe. Next up, we got why Dexter Resurrection could be a failure.